Hello and welcome to Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the 1979 film Hair, directed by Miloš Forman. So this was originally a 1968 anti-war musical, and then it was very popular and it was made into a film in 1979. I've never seen the musical or the film, but I do know the music. Some of the songs are really well known, and I've always intended to see the film, and finally I got round to it. I really love some of the songs. I think Aquarius and Let the Sunshine In, they are great, great kind of 70s songs. I thought the opening of the film was just amazing, but that's because I love the song Aquarius. It starts with this sequence set to the music, set to the Aquarius song, but it's got this very long introduction which leads into the vocal part of the song, and it's just really, it's a great opening. I was ready for a fantastic film. The story follows a young man who's coming from a farming environment in Oklahoma, and he's on his way to Vietnam, but he stops off in New York for a few days, and he ends up kind of meeting this group of hippies in New York City, and has this experience. Now, Miloš Forman, of course, was the director of Amadeus. I reviewed that a little while back. I absolutely love that film. So I was really interested in this. To be honest, I don't think it's quite as good as Amadeus, but I think it's certainly got its strong points. One of the strong points is the choreography. I mean, generally, I don't like musicals, but I think the music in this film is pretty good with some exceptional songs. And the choreography, which was done by Twyla Tharp, is really effective in this. It just is a really cool film. The movement, the kind of hippie culture. It seems like it was filmed in locations of New York, like Central Park and Washington Square. I really enjoyed this. And the soundtrack is just fantastic. It really contains the spirit of the 1960s and 1970s. It's got funk, it's got soul, it's got gospel, it's got rock. Of course, the original musical was came out at the end of the 60s, but this film was a decade later, and the music is very much influenced by 1970s music. I'm not sure I've ever actually heard the soundtrack of the musical. I must listen to it actually and compare them, because that was the original musical, can't have been influenced by 1970s music. But yeah, I loved that kind of 70s feel to the music. I really can't comment on whether it's faithful to the musical, because I haven't seen it. It does look, just Googling it, that the film was criticized for deviating in certain key ways from the musical, not least that the ending was changed significantly. One big potential issue that this film has, watching it decades later, is that it includes multiple examples of kind of racial language that just would not be acceptable today. And, you know, as is often the case, there's this tension between the, the historical context of when a film was made and the modern sensibilities of a viewer today. I do think that it the language absolutely reflects the social and political climate of the 1960s, and the film is definitely taking head on issues such as racism, class, poverty, war, and gender. And it's all intended to critique societal norms of its time. I think it was probably provocative in its day. It was aimed to be challenging at the time it was made. But some of the words used would definitely be considered by contemporary standards. Personally, I think that given the context in which they used, that this was meant to be a kind of social and political critique in its day. I personally don't thought that it's still just about works today, but it is a little bit shocking. The other thing I was uncertain about this film is I just found the characters not very deep. The film is really well made, and the story is actually quite good. So there is scope to have some depth to the characters, but there's just no emotional depth to the characters. I felt they were all quite superficial. The main character, Claude, the Oklahoma man who's off to Vietnam, he kind of falls in love, and he's a country, he's from the country, and he's hanging out with these New York hippies. It would be there's a lot of scope for some emotional depth, but it never really goes beneath the superficial kind of front. And I guess that it just is primarily a musical. I mean, it does revel in its song and in its dance. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ending here. There is a spoiler if you haven't seen it. One of the hippies, George, pretends to be Claude, and he ends up being shipped off to the Vietnam War rather than Claude, and he dies. Now, this all happens quite quickly at the end, and actually the ending is quite tense. I was engaged in the story at the ending, and you want to know what's going to happen. But it all happens a little bit quickly, that then they're suddenly all standing round George's grave, that he actually died in Vietnam. I have no idea what this is trying to say. Um, I have the feeling that of course, it is a negative commentary on war. This is made, the whole film is through the lens of a kind of hippie perspective. But what does it actually mean that this guy kind of ended up accidentally being sent to Vietnam and ends up getting killed, and that the guy that wanted to go and serve ended up not serving? I mean, I guess the point could be that war involves random, ordinary people getting killed, but it's a bit of a strange message. As I said, maybe I'm looking too deep, because maybe this is just, the actual story is just a vehicle for a pretty good set of songs and some interesting dance moves. But overall, from a personal point of view, I really feel I would have liked this film to have a little bit more substance. So I'm not a big fan of musicals, and especially musical cinema. Um, but the music in this film and the kind of hippie aesthetic and the dancing, I actually did find it quite enjoyable. So it did win me over in this way. I think overall, I would say that this is a vibrant musical, and if you like the 60s and 70s aesthetic, if you like the dance sequences, you will enjoy this film. I suspect that it looked a lot more original and felt a lot more original in its day. I did enjoy it. Would I recommend it? I'm not really sure. If you're really into kind of 60s, 70s music and that kind of hippie aesthetic, then it's definitely worth watching. But otherwise, I probably wouldn't recommend this film. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.